As I said, my name is Charlie. I was up here just a few seconds ago playing guitar. I thought about it. Kevin, I should have just done the Britney mic with just sung right into this, just gone for it. But we had two microphones today. Well, welcome. We're really glad that you guys are here. And if you haven't been with us, we've been in a series called Trust Issues. We've been talking about the concept of trust. So in our first week, Pastor Randy talked about why trust is so important, and how actually our relationships, the connections between each other, the feeling of contentment and peace that we can have in our lives are really based on trust at a fundamental level. The week after that, he talked about the 5 essentials of trust, and we're actually going to retouch on those today. And then last week for Father's Day, he talked about how to build your trust muscles. And here's the deal. Your ability to trust in the now hinges on your willingness to talk about and deal with your past. The reason I bring that up is that I know we come and go throughout the summer, but these messages often build on each other. And the great thing is we have a podcast. So if you're a podcast person, look us up. Throw that South Hills app in there, that South Hills podcast in there. It's a great way to stay connected. And we're going to talk and we're going to further that idea today that our ability to do trust now, it really hinges on how much work we've done in our past. So we're going to talk about that today. So today we're actually going to be talking about how to rebuild trust once it's been lost. And if you're like me, you have a story, whether a long time ago or more current, of betrayal and a loss of trust. For me, it had to do with some high school relationship drama. So we're going to do some counseling today, and I'm going to talk about this. When I was in high school, I was a sophomore in high school. I was dating this girl, and we broke up. And some friends of hers in the youth group decided that they weren't going to talk to me anymore in my youth group. She didn't even go to my youth group. I was so offended. And it hurt my feelings. It really did. It messed me up. I just decided, you know what? I'm done with this youth group. I'm done with church. And I walked away because of that break of trust. I felt like these were my friends who I had known in youth group that turned their back on me. Now, some of that, my wife would never say this, but I can be a little bit dramatic, especially as a high school kid. But it was really, really hurtful. And it changed the trajectory of high school. I went and hung out with a very different group of people that did very different things than youth group. And honestly, it's affected me into my adulthood, how I approach friendships, and how I struggle with trust in certain relationships. And that's what a break of trust can do. It can really shape us in how we see other people. And here's the deal. For some of you, that breach of trust might be much, much closer to today. And for some of you, that break of trust may have been something much harder than just high school relationship drama. Maybe someone lied to you. Someone gossiped about you. Someone betrayed you. For some of us, like people we love stole from us or cheated on us. And maybe they didn't just do it once. Maybe there's a long history, or maybe we just recently found out that there was stuff going on that we didn't know. And now that lack of trust is causing us to go back, and it feels like our lives are just kind of crumbling down around us. And the question that we can ask ourselves sometimes is, how can I trust them again? Right? It sounds absurd. How can I just go back to trying to trust them the way that I did before they lied to me? And instead of moving on, we find ourselves obsessing over what they did. We're not forgiving them, not trusting them, because trust feels impossible. Well, I found this very interesting. In John, I think Jesus really understands what we're going through. In John 2, it says this: because of the miraculous signs Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many began to trust in him. But Jesus didn't trust them because he knew human nature. No one needed to tell him what mankind is really like. Does anyone ever remember reading that in the Bible? It's the NLT. NLT is one of my favorite Bibles to read from because it says things in a different language. I think sometimes when we've heard stuff in kind of the older Bible language with the thous and the these, and we're like, yes, of course, thou hath begin for, it's like, what in the world? How amazing is that Jesus knew humankind and knew that he couldn't just give himself away and trust everyone that he came across. That's how I felt after my betrayal. I felt like I couldn't trust people. I felt like I was holding myself back from a lot of friendships. And the hard thing is, Jesus is right. We're often right. There are people that we should not trust again after they've hurt us. But some people do deserve a second chance. And the truth of the matter is that everybody who crosses us, if we just cut them out of our lives, we're going to end up alone very quickly. But the question is, how do we know which is which? How do we know when to press back into a relationship, to do the hard work of building trust again? And how do we know when to say, I just can't continue this relationship? Because here's the deal. When someone has really hurt you, trusting again is more than a decision. It's a dilemma. It's a choice between equally unfavorable options, right? Because if we don't trust that person again, we miss out on everything that was good about that relationship. It's like Randy said in that first week, when we don't have trust, we miss out on true connection and we settle for fake connection. When we don't have trust in our lives, we don't have contentment and peace. Everything feels like it's always on shaky ground. But if we do trust them again, does that mean that we're acting like what happened didn't really happen? And the thing is, I don't want us to do either. It's absurd to think that we can just shut off our feelings and dive right back into deep relationship with someone who's hurt us. Because trusting again isn't a switch you flip. It's a process that you work through. And part of that process is figuring out if we even can get back to that place. So what's the process? What does it look like? Well, the truth is, whether you're someone who has been betrayed or someone who has betrayed and doesn't know how to approach it, and often for many of us, we've been both, right? We've read both sides of that script. We've been betrayed, and we've been the person to betray. How do we move forward? How do we rebuild trust without denying what happened or dismissing our pain? We're going to talk about that today. And the first step is we need to recover. We need to actively heal from what happened to us. Because if you break your leg, you don't go out the next day and start running a 5K, right? And if someone breaks your heart, you don't go right back to trusting them the next day. Because if we treat something that's broken like it's not broken, it breaks worse. This is why they pull players from important games. Now, I'm a Celtics fan, and so I'm very happy right now. If you don't follow the NBA, they won the championship. But there is a guy, Kristaps Porzingis, who got hurt, and he unfortunately gets hurt a lot. Sorry, Kristaps. Doubt you're watching this, but he gets hurt a lot. Maybe he does. Maybe he's really into small churches in Idaho. Kristaps. But he hurt his leg in the finals. And he said something after the game like, I'm going to die out there to be on the court. But then he was out for 2 games. Why? Because cooler heads prevailed, right? People know that he would want to die, right? He has that competitive fire. He wants to be on the floor. But the doctors and the coaches around him say, no, it's about more than just this game. You might be able to play this game and ruin your career. And the thing is, physical and relational rehab follow some of the same basic principles. They both take time, and they both take a lot of effort. You know, they say time heals all wounds. It's just not true. If we don't put in the work to heal, we often don't. And also, nothing can be healed in a day. I don't care how hard you PT that injury for one day, you're not going to get it all done in one day. So think about that. Think about how a physical therapist would rehab your broken leg, right? They'd x-ray it. They'd figure out what was going on. They'd give you some painkillers, very important. Then they'd reset it. They'd put it in a cast, and they'd tell you to lay off it for a while. And then when you were ready, they'd give you a series of kind of small stretches and movements to slowly rebuild your strength. Be really painful at first, but then you'd slowly work your way back to functioning as you did before. And it's the same emotionally, right? We have to figure out what's going on. We need to rest. We need to recover. And then we need to slowly work our way back to where we were before. I loved this passage. Hebrews is my favorite book of the Bible, and I think this is really helpful for what we're talking about today. So Hebrews 12, 11 through 13 says this: "No discipline is enjoyable while it's happening. It's painful. But afterward, there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. So take a new grip with your tired hands and strengthen your weak knees. Mark out a straight path for your feet so that those who are weak and lame will not fall, but become strong." I love that. Take up your new grip with your tired hands. Because I know if there are people listening to this today who have been hurt, who have been betrayed, and the idea of trying to heal again or trying to move forward feels so exhausting. But if we are to have right living and peace again, that's what's on the other side if we would work in the right way. Just like physical therapy, the bigger the issue, the longer the recovery time. I get this a lot in working with people in grief. How long is this going to take? How do I know when I get there? What's the sign that I've recovered enough to move forward? That's a hard question to answer, but I would say to move forward, you've got to get to a place where you're not consumed with what happened. You're not replaying it over and over again. You're not being triggered every day, multiple times a day when you think about it or when something reminds you of that betrayal. And part of the way that we do this is by telling ourselves the whole story. Part of telling ourselves the whole story is really allowing ourselves to feel everything we need to feel, to process our emotions, to sit in our emotions. Only then, when we're ready, when we feel like we've really understood our own emotions when it comes to the betrayal, we need to consider the other person, the other side of that. Because often in our stories, we want to paint ourselves as the good guy who never does anything wrong. And that person that betrayed us is they're just pure evil. And often human beings are more complicated than that. And recovery involves embracing that whole story. Now, I want to say that does not excuse what that other person did. Part of feeling everything we need to feel is not minimizing your emotions, but trying our best to see their side of the story too. Asking ourselves, what happened to them that may have caused them to do this to me? Because here's the truth. Hurt people, right? And to get there, you're going to need help. This is one of the themes throughout this message. You need help. Which is why the first step when we've been hurt like this, surround yourself with some people that you can trust. Close friends, a counselor. If the person you're with is a part of a couple's counselor, incredibly important. A small group, friends. Surround yourself with people because we're not meant to do this alone. Find people that are going to help you to step back, to get a different perspective, to vent, to process, to pray, to start doing that difficult inner work. Find people that are going to encourage you and confront you when they need to, laugh with you, celebrate with you, eat ice cream with you at like 2 a.m, whatever you need to get through that recovery process. And you have to allow this process to take as long as it's going to take. And if your supporters are emotionally healthy, they're going to signal you when it's time to move to the next step. And the next step is our favorite step, to forgive. Forgive. Let go of your anger and determine that they don't owe you anymore. Now, nobody wants to do this step, right? When someone falls short, when someone betrays us and breaks our trust, our gut reaction is to lash out, to hurt them so that they would understand how we've been hurt. And honestly, that initial anger, it's healthy. You don't need to feel bad about being angry when you've been betrayed. Don't ignore that emotion. One of my favorite books is a book called Why Emotions Matter. And it was written from a Christian perspective that our emotions are like the dashboard of our car. Your emotions God gave you for a reason. And when something flashes up on that dashboard, just like when it does on your car, if you ignore it, down the road you're going to hear some stuff and there's going to be some problems. And when anger comes up, it's telling us that something is not right. Something needs to be made right. So don't ignore your emotions. Sometimes as Christians, we try to just act like we're not sad. But when we're feeling sad, there's a reason. We want to act like, oh, I shouldn't be angry. I shouldn't feel this way. But there is a reason that you're angry. That's part of why we sit in our emotions. Because when someone's hurt us, we need to name what they did and what it cost us. And the more specific you are, and this is true throughout this whole process of regaining trust, the more specific we are, the more healing it can be. You have to work through your anger by fully feeling it and processing it so that you can let it go. Now, it's naive to think that this process is going to be tidy and clean and just wrapped up with a pretty little bow. And it's not like once you process it, you're like, wow, it's over. I'd no longer feel upset ever again. And there's a reason that recovery comes before forgiveness. Because sometimes when we try to rush forgiveness, when we try to get to that place of forgiveness too soon, we can kind of skip a step. And we didn't really ever fully heal. And that leaves us in limbo. But the thing about forgiveness is that until you forgive that person, they aren't locked up, but you are. When we stay in unforgiveness, we're the ones who are not free. Because when we carry around unforgiveness, it makes us a slave to the person who hurt you. And it will slowly turn you into a more bitter and vengeful person. What you've done is you've given up aspects of your story to them. And if you're walking around just waiting them to pay back what you owe, they might not be able to pay it back. They may not want to. And yet you're walking around holding on to this deficit. And when you release them, you actually stop holding yourself hostage and you are free. Because if you don't forgive people in your past, you'll sabotage your own future. And it's not just about saying, I forgive them. I don't know if there are any Office fans, but in The Office, there's this guy named Michael Scott. He's kind of the main character of The Office, and he's not doing well financially in this one episode. So he walks out into the office and he yells, I declare bankruptcy! And one of his office mates says, you don't just say it to declare bankruptcy. He goes, I didn't say it, I declared it. Right? We don't just declare that someone's forgiven and make it so. Right? We can slap lipstick on a pig. That doesn't make it anything but a pig. And if we don't do the recovery before we go to forgive, it doesn't really accomplish the goal of forgiveness. And in fact, Jesus talks about forgiveness in Matthew 18, about how many times we're supposed to forgive. Peter came to him and asked, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? Jesus says, no, not 7 times. Jesus replied, but 70 times 7, which for the non-math majors is 490. And what Jesus is saying here is, first of all, that we should be people that forgive. But I think sometimes those 490 are not 490 of the same thing back to back to back, but maybe one thing that we have to forgive over and over. Because even if we do the work, there's going to be times where that resentment comes back up. And we need to remind ourselves that we have forgiven and let go of that hurt. Interestingly, right after this passage, Jesus tells a parable. And you've probably heard this one before. This man owes a king a lot of money, like more than he could ever pay back. And he's brought before the king and he begs to be forgiven. And the king graciously forgives him this incredible sum. That man leaves and runs into a friend of his who owes him like $20. And that man has the friend thrown in prison. So then that man is brought back before the king, and the king sentences him to prison for his inability to forgive. And it's a reminder that we as Christians have been forgiven much. And so we are to be people who forgive. And it says this multiple times throughout the Gospels and throughout the letters, that the way that we forgive is what will be applied to us. And that's a sobering, there are some things in Scripture that really challenge me, and that's one of them. We don't need to rush forgiveness, but as Christians, we are meant to be people who forgive. And when we forgive, what we're saying is, I'm canceling this debt against you. You don't owe me. Right? You don't have to pay me back. You're off the hook. And the thing to know about forgiveness is the other person doesn't need to ask for forgiveness. The other person doesn't have to be sorry. Because forgiveness requires nothing from that person. Now, reconciliation and the rebuilding of trust, that takes two. But forgiveness only takes one. And Jesus gives us an example of incredible forgiveness in Romans 5. It says this: "But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. And since we have been made right in God's sight by the blood of Christ, he will certainly save us from God's condemnation. For since our friendship with God was restored by the death of his Son while we were still his enemies, we will certainly be saved through the life of his Son. So now we can rejoice in our wonderful new relationship with God because our Lord Jesus Christ has made us friends of God." So while we were still sinners, while we weren't sorry, while we didn't care about God at all, he died for us. And that forgiveness is available for anyone who wants it. But the next part, that right relationship with God, that involves us making a step towards him. And in the same way, when we forgive, we're letting them go. If we want reconciliation, that's when they need to come back. Because forgiveness has to do with letting go of the past. Trust has to do with how we operate in the future. I can fully forgive you. I can fully forgive someone and not trust them. That is okay. Because like I said, forgiveness takes one person. Trust, it takes two. But if trust is going to be rebuilt, there needs to be forgiveness. And when we move on with the trust building process but don't really forgive, we might bring up the offense again, and that unforgiveness is going to come out of us, and that's actually going to cause harm and hurt, and that's going to break their trust in return. And we end up in this cycle where nobody trusts anybody. So the question is, how do we know if we're ready to trust again? And the next step is we evaluate. What you have to do is determine what you really want and what's possible now in this relationship where trust has been broken. So the first question is, what do I want? In other words, given these circumstances, do I want to move forward with this person? It's a big question. You might meditate on things like, are there good reasons to pursue this relationship? Are there things worth fighting for? Is this salvageable? Is there something I'm missing? And that's where, again, it's helpful to surround yourself with people that can help you to step back from this situation. Sometimes we can get so close that we can't see. We need to step back with trusted friends and ask that question: is there something worth saving here? By the way, you know that you haven't forgiven somebody when you ask this question, you're willing to blow up everything just to hurt them, right? And we've all been there. We've had those thoughts. When you're in that place, we need to go back to that healing and forgiveness step. And here's the deal. You may not be able to move forward with everyone, and that's okay. You have the option to say, I forgive you, I wish you well, and I have no desire for an ongoing relationship. I don't want to work here anymore, right? I don't want to be part of this organization because of what has happened. So after we ask, what do I want? We need to ask, who am I dealing with? Because trust requires two people. And so moving forward requires us to have someone who's willing to participate in the process. If the other person can't see their own part, they can't admit that they were wrong, if they can't sincerely apologize and then also make adjustments to their behavior to help you to trust them, then they can't be reconciled with. Again, you should forgive them. But you can't have an ongoing relationship with someone who's unwilling to go on that journey with you. The Bible's full of a bunch of literature that they call wisdom literature. So like Proverbs, Job is wisdom literature, and it's filled with amazing Hebrew wisdom. And there are kind of three types of people that the Bible talks about. And the first is a wise person. Now this person will listen when you confront them, they'll own their behavior, they'll apologize, they're going to learn and grow, and they're going to treat you differently after they've been corrected. Conversations with these type of people feel attentive, they're kind, they're honest, they're full of humility. In Proverbs it says this, correct the wise and they will love you. Instruct the wise and they will be even wiser. Teach the righteous and they will learn even more. So sometimes we run into those type of people, the wise, and when we confront them, when we ask them to change, they own their part, they're humble, and we can move forward with them. But there's a different type of people, and those people are called fools. These people are defensive and combative when confronted. They don't want to become aware of their blind spots. They're convinced that it's everyone else who has the problem. Everyone's thinking of a friend right now. Everyone's like, yes. And they think that the only reason you're critiquing them is because you want to hurt them, you want to attack them. Proverbs says this about a fool, anyone who rebukes a mocker will get an insult in return. So don't bother correcting mockers, they will only hate you. Now, I want to be clear, even wise people get defensive sometimes, right? None of us is perfect. There are certain buttons you push on me and I get very defensive. But a fool is someone who is constantly in that place. Not just a single moment or reaction, but an ongoing stance of denial and defensiveness. And with fools, we don't always need to cut them out of our lives like the next type of people we're going to talk about, but with a fool, we're going to have boundaries. We're going to have different boundaries with that person. We're maybe not going to have those deep conversations. We're going to maybe accept that the friendship we have with them is the friendship we have. And if there's not that trust, we're just going to put boundaries around that person. We're talking about boundaries next week. But the third type of person is an evildoer. Now, this sounds really old Bible-y, evildoer. But an evildoer are the people that generally desire to emotionally wound you or destroy your reputation or use physical violence against you. They have sinister intentions, right? This isn't a fool who gets defensive but means well in their own immature way. This is someone who's actively trying to hurt you. And when we're dealing with someone like this is why 911 and mediators and lawyers and restraining orders exist, right? These are the type of people that you speak to only through a third party. These are the type of people that you surround yourself with that group, with that counselor, and they help you to find out, am I dealing with a fool or am I dealing with something worse than that? Because Proverbs tells us this, that anyone who corrects the wicked will get hurt. And the hard thing is those type of people that are unsafe are the ones that think it's ridiculous that you would think it's unsafe, right? They want to isolate you. They want to keep you separate. They want to control the narrative because they have sinister intentions. So once you establish what you want and which of these type of people you're dealing with, you can start to reevaluate if they have the essentials necessary for you to begin to extend trust again in small doses. And these are the 5 things that you need to establish trust. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. First of all, you need understanding. You need to have a way, you need to understand each other. You need to have motive. You need to have the right motivation to build trust. You need to want the same thing. You need to have the ability, right? Are they a fool? Do they not have the ability to own their part and move forward? You need to have character, right? Character, when we realize that we've been the betrayer, we turn around and we look at ourselves. And the last thing we need is a track record. And that's where we get to this next part. Once we kind of get to that point, we experiment. You give them opportunities to prove that they're trustworthy, right? You give them opportunities to build up that track record of trust, right? Because they've lost it. So with experiments, what we do is we kind of build trust in baby steps. Often the one who is kind of the betrayer wants all of the trust back right away, right out the gate. And that's just not how it works. Jesus, in Matthew 25, tells a story in a parable. And you guys have probably heard this, the parable of the talents, where there's this master who gives these servants some money. He gives them different amounts of money. Now, the first servant goes and buries it, doesn't do anything with it. The other 2 make money with that money. And he comes back and he looks at those servants who did well with what they've been given, and he says, well done, good and faithful servant. Maybe you've heard that. You've been faithful handling this small amount, so now I will give you more responsibility. And in the same way, we're not just going to jump into full trust, right? If someone's moved out of the house, we don't just go, okay, I trust you again. No, we're going to start with a date. We're going to start with meeting in safe places. We're going to build that trust. And here's the deal about building trust. All throughout this process, it's all about how specific we're going to be, right? We don't just say general statements. We need to lay out very clear parameters for what that person needs to build trust, right? We need to tell other people what we're doing, these experiments that we're running to help us to build trust. You don't just say, hey, I want you to be nicer, right? That's very open to interpretation. What we need is, I need to see this from you. I need to see it under these circumstances, and I need to see it in this time frame, and I need to see it with these outcomes. That's what I need to go forward and trust. Because if we just have a willy-nilly plan, then really rebuilding trust is just a wish. It's not really a plan at all. Everybody needs to be able to identify the new skills that need to be built, the experiences that need to happen to grow that trust again. Now, for the one who is the betrayer of trust, and I have been in that boat, it's going to require you to develop a willingness to be questioned and a lack of defensiveness and frustration when the people that we've hurt ask us questions. When we're the one who's rebuilding trust, we hate how long it takes and how much reassurance they need, but that is the process. You're going to have to be okay with people questioning you, and this honestly requires a lot of humility. It requires you to silence your ego and die to yourself. Because repairing a breach of trust requires both parties to want it, to work for it, to seek help, and demonstrate reliability over time. But it is possible. In Jesus' life, he had people betray him. One of the most famous, we have Peter. Jesus is in the midst of his trial, and people ask him if they know Jesus, and he says 3 times, I never knew that guy. And if I were Jesus, I might say to Peter after I rose, like, hey man, get out of here. You're out. But instead, Jesus comes back after his resurrection. He restores Peter. And Peter is the bedrock, one of the bedrocks of the growing church movement, because he was restored. And so for you sitting here today, whether you are the betrayer or the betrayed, if we follow this path, trust can be rebuilt. The question is, are you ready to humble yourself to begin the process of putting that relationship back together? You don't have to be. You don't have to be ready right now. But it's definitely where you start. So if you're the betrayed, I would just ask you today, where are you in that process? Are you still recovering? Are you ready to forgive? Are you not ready to forgive? Do you need to find a counselor? Do you need someone to help you sift through all of these feelings? Or do you need to evaluate where you are? Do we need to start to experiment? Have you kept that person at arm's length and now it's time to try and rebuild that trust again? Maybe you rushed one of those phases. Maybe you're stuck in this kind of weird limbo where you don't really trust them, but you also don't have the closeness that you crave. Now, if you're the betrayer, I would ask you, have you humbled yourself? Have you asked that loved one what they need to trust you again? Or have you rushed the process? Does that make you uncomfortable? Does that make you feel ashamed? And so you just tell them, hey, we just need to move on. It's in the past. One of the things I hate when Christians say is it's covered by the blood, right? Jesus forgave me, so we can't talk about it. That's not what forgiveness is. And that's not what Jesus says. Because here's the deal. As someone who I've done this, I've betrayed people that I love dearly. And betrayal never comes from a place of health. You're never doing wonderful and really living the way God wants you to and betraying the trust of people you love. Those things don't go together. Often there's something going on, whether it's an addiction, some hidden weakness, an anger problem, an inability to be vulnerable with the people closest to you, whatever it is that's causing you to break that trust, you got to own up to it. And for both, you got to seek help. This could be an advertisement for counseling, and I've gotten lots of counseling, right? Go find a counselor. Find somebody trusted here today, the people wearing lanyards today as you're leaving. If you have been betrayed, if you are someone who keeps betraying the people you love, even though you don't want to, come and talk to us. I love our saying. It says we're the perfect place for imperfect people. Because for too long, church has been a place where you come and you act like you have everything together when you don't. And let me let you in on a secret. None of us have it all together. My wife and I's favorite time to fight is on the way to church Sunday morning, right? Don't come here and pretend like you're fine and be dying on the inside. I hate when I see somebody go through a divorce in the church, and I saw them every Sunday, dressed to the nines, trying to look happy, missing the point. If you're filled with shame, don't. God has come. The reason he died on the cross, the reason he forgave you when you were far from him, is that you would have right relationship with him again. Maybe that trust that's been broken is trust with God. Maybe you need to embark on this process. Maybe you feel like God has hurt you in the past. That's hard. That's a hard thing to walk through. That's something we want to walk through with you here today. Because here's the deal. We were made for trust. Trust is so important to what it means to be human. So don't leave today with distrust or betrayal in your heart.
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that he's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the third way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because the Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the 4th way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that he can bless and anoint your finances and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you and thank you for watching our online service today.